Welcome to those of you who are with us online this morning. It's been a little while since we've had a science lesson, so I thought we'd have a little science to begin the morning with, just because. 10,000 trillion. 1 times 10 to the power of 16. Also can be expressed as 10 quadrillion. What do you think it is? What does that number represent? Any idea? Anybody want to make a guess?
Is it your IRA? Is it your IRA?
Is it my IRA? No, it's a little bit low for my IRA. The one I dream about. That's the number of cells that an average person has in their body. Obviously, size of the person would cause that to vary a little bit, and obviously no one has actually counted that, so it's an extrapolated number, but it's a very big number, and that's a lot of cells to be floating around doing stuff, right? Just as a matter of information, the smallest life form, life, of course, is created when you have cells that are able to replicate themselves. That's the kind of the core definition of what life is. And the smallest life form is a microplasm genitalium. It's a bacteria. It's a little one-cell animal, creature, life. And it's only about 0.02 micrometers. It's got 500 genes in it, and it replicates by a very simple binary fission. It creates an image of itself just by a simple splitting of the atom, of the cell. Compared to that, the human cell has 100 micrometers in size, 25,000 genes, and it replicates itself by a process of mitosis that involves multiple steps. And I could pronounce those for you, but they would all be wrong. The point is, it's extremely complex. And you have quadrillions of those cells going on in your body all the time, continually coming into existence and going out of existence, splitting, dying, being replaced, reprogrammed. How big is the cell? If you took 10,000 cells and lined them up side by side, it'd be about the size of a grain of sand. That's pretty small. And here's a couple of AI-generated replicas of what a typical human cell would look like. Very, very complex. The nucleus of that cell, that little round thing right there in the middle, has 46 chromosomes, each packed with 6 foot of DNA plus histones, chromatin, all of those other things that are hard to pronounce. And every second, every human cell is carrying out millions of biochemical reactions, tens of thousands of gene transcriptions and translation events, billions of molecular interactions, and it's responding to the environment around it. It's responding to what's happening in real time in your life. all of the activities that are going on in your cell, every one of those quadrillion cells in your body, individually, the function of that, the activity that it's doing, the complexity of that activity, as it interacts with all of the other components of the cell, would require a computer that operated at the zettascale speed. And zettascale is 10 to the power 21 flops. Flop is a floating point operations per second. It's a big number. 1 followed by 21 zeros. That's each of those quadrillion cells in your body. And in the midst of all of that activity that it's doing, it's able to reproduce itself in an exact copy on demand. Complex, would you say? And it happened by accident. Right? What a miracle. Or not. How much faith does it take to believe that that kind of design, that kind of complexity, that kind of computing, raw computing power, not to mention the very fact that we have no idea how it even initiates life itself, how the action of reproduction even happens out of dead matter. How much faith does it take to believe that that's an accident compared to the faith of a supreme, all-powerful designer designing it and implementing it and sustaining it on purpose? I just find it remarkable. I just mind-boggling. And within that cell, all of the components of the cell, the DNA, the genetics, all of it is just beyond comprehension in complexity. And yet it's there. You don't believe in God because you can't see Him? How can you not see Him? It's impossible not to see Him. All right, so much for science. To our text. When Jesus had finished saying these things, He said to His disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. And they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill Him. But not during the festival, they said, for there would be a riot among the people. We don't want to do it during Passover because the people might get upset with us. So let's figure out another way to do it. Well, it ends up that they did do it during Passover, didn't they? Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. And Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus and ask, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present. What's the significance of the 30 pieces of silver? I can't hardly see you, much less hear you. If the building was any bigger, you are really scattered out today. You have deserted me. What's the significance of the 30 pieces of silver? Anybody? It's the price of a slave, right? The price of a slave. So what do you think about Luke saying that Satan entered into Judas? How does that compute with you? Luke 22:3, Luke more than most emphasizes the cosmic or the spiritual struggle between God's kingdom and the powers of darkness. That's something that in his investigation as a biographer and his conversations with all of the people that he consulted, because he never knew Jesus personally. He only knew the people who knew Jesus. But he, of all the gospel writers, gave us more depth of the biography of Jesus than anybody else. He, I don't think, is being symbolic when he says Satan entered into Judas. I don't believe he thought that he was being metaphorical or symbolic when he talked about that. I believe that he sees Judas as being possessed. He sees Judas as one who has already prepared the soil. We have seen his greed. We know that he was stealing from the purse that the disciples used for their daily needs. We see him disillusioned because he doesn't think that Jesus is acting and doing the things that he ought to be doing to overthrow the Roman government. And he kind of is presented as someone who's unhappy about it, angry about it because of that. And because the ground is fertile and open and ready, Luke sees him as being demon-possessed, Satan-possessed. The Greek word for entered is the same word used elsewhere when evil spirits enter people, implying a real spiritual invasion. Now, that kind of raises the question, if Satan entered him as a presence, took control of him as a presence, then does that excuse him from any personal responsibility? Has he given up his free choice in the matter? If I could hear you, I would invite you to share your thoughts on that. Why did he betray Jesus? Well, there are several things that we can theorize. We don't know for sure because Luke doesn't tell us why, and Judas doesn't tell us why. We could say that for one, it fulfills prophecy, which it does. Luke 22 says, "The Son of Man will go as it has been decreed." This is Jesus. As it has been decreed, what is he referring to? He's referring to prophecy. It's been foretold that he would do that. But woe to the man who betrays him. Satan, of course, if Satan is actually inhabiting him, then that certainly is a reason for him to betray Jesus. Maybe it was done partially out of a misguided zeal. Maybe he was doing it because he thought it was time for Jesus to reveal his true purpose, his true mission on earth, which in Judas's mind was to take on the role of king of Israel and overthrow the invading forces of the Romans. Maybe it was out of fear. Maybe he saw that it was a way to protect himself with the Jewish leaders when all of this went down. When it did go down, you remember that the apostles went to an upper room and locked themselves in. there was a reason to be afraid. Or maybe he was just greedy. Maybe he just wanted the 30 pieces of silver. Or maybe it's some of all of that. Yes? No? Maybe?
All of the above.
All of the above. So we come to Wednesday. We, of course, are using the chronological Bible put together by F. LaGard Smith, and he spends a fair amount of editorial time explaining that the chronology at this point becomes pretty fuzzy, and there's a lot of disagreement about exactly how things played out. And even though we're going to come to these events a little bit later on in the text, I'm going to pause a little bit this morning and look at some of the factors that influence how we interpret the chronology, the order of the events. And when we get through with that, it's still going to be a matter of opinion. I don't have any dogmatic position on this, and your opinion is as good as mine. So to begin with, because we are at the point now where this makes a difference in the chronology, we ask the question, on what day of the week did Jesus die? And what's the answer to that? On what day of the week did he die? What day did he die on, Jeff?
Friday?
Friday. Go ahead.
Well, in order to truly fulfill the prophecy about 3 days and 3 nights of the symbol of Jonah, it really had to have been on Thursday. And there is a reason for that also. The Passover, he was actually on the day of preparation, and there's really one Passover that corresponds with that also corresponds well with when we think Jesus would have been there in Jerusalem, and that Passover also would have been on Thursday and Friday.
Okay, I've got Friday and I've got Thursday. Do I have any other takers? Come on up, Jeff.
He could have died. He could have died any time, but when he takes us, up to heaven, he watches us, and he could tell people, well, it's your time to pass away.
You bet. Absolutely.
And the Bible said he could take anyone up to heaven, and he can do like pass away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you, Lanny.
You're welcome.
Just a point again, it's really important to recall that Jesus was very emphatic about the sign of Jonah. And I have tried to come up with a way to, even with the way the Jews counted the days, and there's really not a way to get 3 days and 3 nights if it's on Friday.
I got Thursday, I got Friday. Any other? Well, I think I'm going to take Wednesday then. we're going to unpack it, and of course, what David is saying is going to be a very important part of that. And when we get through with it, you can select any day you choose. The huge majority of the Christian world, Eastern and Western, says Friday. We have Good Friday, which wasn't good for him, but it was good for us. I mean, the overwhelming majority says Friday. So you are with the majority. You're wrong, but you're with the majority. Okay. So let's unpack it a little bit. Let's think about the symbolism of it for a minute. Because, you know, everything Jesus did was what? Fulfillment of prophecy. Everything he did was remiss. Everything he did was to a point and counterpoint, type and fulfillment of a type, okay? So the symbolism, we go back to Exodus 12, your lamb shall be without blemish, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. This is the first month of the Jewish year, pronounced in different ways. I'm going to say Nisan. Some people say Nisan, but most say Nisan. When all of Israel shall kill their lambs. Jesus is our Passover lamb. John 1:29, John the Baptist says, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So early on, he's established that he's going to be this lamb. What lamb? The Passover lamb. He's going to be the lamb that was the type, or the fulfillment of the type of the lamb that was killed and whose blood was sped on the doorposts and the lintels in Egypt when Israel was finally freed from captivity. So that's the first thing that we need to keep in mind. Jesus is on trial during the day of preparation when lambs are killed. John 19:14 says, now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was the 14th of Nisan. Let me just give you a prelude to this. We have the account of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And we have the account of John. And there's considerable tension between those two accounts. Okay? Now, obviously, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John are all Matthew, Mark, and Luke are all working from a common source, whatever that was. They are very, very similar in their agreement of that. John is writing much later, and he's writing from a different perspective. And the way he lays it out creates tension between what the synoptic says. So we're going to see that as we go through. So we have the day of preparation when the lambs are killed. It's going to be very important to the connecting of type and antitype that Jesus match what happened in the original Passover. Jesus dies at the 9th hour, so the first hour is at 6 o'clock, the 6th hour is at noon, the 9th hour is around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. This is the time of the lamb sacrifice. This is when the people kill their sacrificial lambs. Matthew 27:45 says, now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. So about 3 o'clock, somewhere around there, Jesus is going to fulfill the prophecy, act out the antitype of the Passover lamb. Paul declares in 1 Corinthians 5:7, for Christ is our what? Passover lamb. He makes it crystal clear that this is the connection back to the type that we see in the Exodus account. So Jesus is our Passover lamb. He dies at 3 o'clock on the 14th of Nisan, the exact hour the lambs are being crucified. All right? I think we can hang a peg there. Here's some considerations. Jesus rose from the dead early on the first day of the week. We can hang a peg on that, right? Everybody agrees all of the writers agree that that's when Jesus rose from the dead. The women, Mary Magdalene and the women, came to the tomb at dawn. But the first day of the week begins when? 6 o'clock Saturday night. Remember, the Jewish day starts at sundown. So Saturday night, 6 o'clock, that's the first day of the week. That's our Saturday, but it's their Sunday. So sometime after 6 o'clock, fairly early, Jesus is out of the tomb. Now, he won't be seen until daylight, but he's out of the tomb. All right, Jesus said he would be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. Matthew 12:40 says, "For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man," this is Jesus talking, "so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." There are at least 20 references to the third day, or some variation of that, in connection with Jesus' resurrection. I think that's pretty significant. We're talking about type and antitype. Jesus is the Passover lamb. He says it's going to be just like it was with Jonah and the whale. It's going to be 3 days and 3 nights. John says, 1931, in order that the bodies would not remain on the cross during the Sabbath, the Jews asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies removed. Of course, you know they came to Jesus and he was already dead, so they didn't break any bones. But here's where we get your Friday. This is where your Friday comes from. What day is the Sabbath? The Sabbath is Saturday. The Sabbath is Saturday. So this is why so much of the world says, okay, he died on Friday. Well, we have to consider that this was happening the day before the Sabbath. John declares the day Christ died to be the day of preparation, which is the 14th of Nisan, and the day following his death is to be a special Sabbath, a high Sabbath. John 19:31 says it was the day of preparation, and the next day was a high Sabbath. Nisan 15 was always treated as a Sabbath, and it could fall on any day of the week. The way that the Jewish calendar is arranged, and I think you probably know this, it's on our lunar calendar, and it's based on the phases of the moon. And so where we say Easter is always on Sunday, that's purely arbitrary on our part. In the Jewish Passover was observed on whatever the 14th day of Nisan fell, and that would be different every year. So it could be any day of the week. He died on the 14th of Nisan. The lambs were killed on the 14th of Nisan. They ate the Passover meal on the 15th of Nisan after the lambs had been killed. Obviously, you're going to eat the lambs after they're killed, right? That makes sense. But they killed the lambs late in the evening on the 14th. They eat them after 6 o'clock, after sundown, on the 15th. Are you with me so far? That 15th, whenever it falls, is a Sabbath. So, if we want to put it on a chart, we have the 14th day, the 14th of Nisan. In the evening, the lambs are killed. And then on the 15th, after 6 o'clock in the evening, the Passover meal is eaten. The Synoptic Gospels, and this is where it gets really, where the tension comes in. The Synoptic Gospels clearly say that Jesus instructed the apostles to prepare a place for them to eat the Passover meal. They ate a meal in an upper room during which Jesus ordained the Lord's Supper. This could not be the Seder meal that the Jewish people ate on the 15th of Nisan, because Jesus is still alive. You don't eat the lamb until after it's killed, right? So if we're talking about type and antitype, the meal that Jesus ate with his apostles, that the Synoptic Gospels call a Passover meal, was not the meal that the Jewish people ate following the killing of the lambs on the 14th of Nisan. It had to be a special meal of some kind that Jesus is calling a Passover meal, but it has to be done before Passover because he's part of it and he hasn't died yet. Are you with me? John describes a meal just before the Passover festival, following which Jesus washed the disciples' feet. And then he begins this long teaching session that we have in John, 12, 13, 14, 15. It's a long session. John doesn't mention anything about what we call the Lord's Supper. The synoptics all cover the Lord's Supper. John doesn't. He talks about Jesus, after they ate, put on the towel and washed the apostles' feet. It seems to me that this was not the same meal as the one called a Passover meal during which he instituted the Lord's Supper. Now, I could be wrong about that. And it's not a big issue one way or the other. But it just seems to me that it doesn't fit. It seems like these are two different occasions. Very close together, but not the same occasion. Did I skip one? I don't think I can go back. Can you back me up one slide up there? If you can. I think I skipped one. I'm not sure. I guess I didn't. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So we've got some pegs. We've got the first day of the week. Jesus is out of the grave. We've got Jesus' comment that he's going to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. So if we start with Sunday and go back, 3 days and 3 nights is 72 hours. From Friday evening to Sunday morning is at the most 30 hours. Now, the way that they get around this, Gilbert, is that they say that in the Jewish tradition, any part of a day counts as a whole day. So they count Friday evening, those last 3 hours of Friday, one day, Saturday one day, and then whatever time Jesus was in the tomb, Sunday is one day. Okay, even assuming that's true, as David said, there is absolutely no way you can get 3 nights. It is physically impossible to get 3 nights. Can't happen. Now, if we say he died on Thursday, we can make it work. That's 52 hours. It will work, but you have to go with partial days. If we back it up to Wednesday, then we've got plenty of time for him to be in the tomb for all 3 days and all 3 nights. It also Mark 16:1 says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices. They bought spices so they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Now remember that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus had some spices. They had some myrrh and aloe, I think, that they had already put on Jesus, and they had put the shroud over him. And now the Marys have gone out after he's dead and have purchased additional spices to carry with them to do the more complete embalming process on Jesus on the first day of the week. Again, if you go with a Friday death, I don't know how they can buy them, because he's not dead until 3 o'clock. And they obviously follow follow Nicodemus to the tomb so they know where he is. It's 6 o'clock in the evening, and it's already moving into the Sabbath. They can't buy them on the Sabbath. But if we go back to Wednesday and we consider Thursday the Sabbath, then they've got Friday to do their purchasing. And then they're ready when Sabbath is over, Saturday, to do the anointing. So that also lends itself in this narrative to how that they were able to do that. So here's kind of one way of looking at it. Tuesday evening, they have the Last Supper. They go to Gethsemane, and Jesus is arrested. Wednesday, by the way, if the crucifixion is on Friday, really nothing happens on Wednesday, which is kind of strange that as busy as that week is, Wednesday would be a day of silence. Anyway, so Wednesday they have the trials, and if the Wednesday was right, then they would have the crucifixion then. He would die at 3 p.m. They would have the burial Wednesday evening. Thursday then is the high Sabbath. It's first night in the tomb. Friday, the spices are prepared, second day and night. Saturday is the weekly Sabbath, the third day and night. And then Sunday, pre-dawn, he rises from the dead. At dawn, the Marys go to the tomb. Now that's a Wednesday. Again, you can make a Thursday work, but you cannot have 3 days and 3 nights on a Friday. Any comments? Anybody want to argue? Whatever you land on, it won't keep you out of heaven. That's the good news. And the world will continue to celebrate Good Friday. They'll just be wrong. Okay. So each day Jesus was teaching at the temple, and each evening he went out to spend the night on the hill called the Mount of Olives. And all of the people came early in the morning to hear him at the temple. Matthew and Mark imply that he went to Bethany. Bethany, of course, is on the side of the Mount of Olives. Each evening, until he went to Gethsemane. The last night he didn't go to Bethany. He went to the garden, to the Mount of Olives, but he went to Gethsemane. It's very likely, and this, of course, is supposition, but I can't think that it's not right. He probably stayed with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus each of those nights, leading up to the time that he went to Gethsemane and was betrayed. Even after Jesus had performed so many signs in their presence, they still would not believe in him. This was to fulfill the word of Isaiah the prophet, Lord, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For this reason, they could not believe, because as Isaiah says elsewhere, that's from Isaiah 6, 9, and 10, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory. Isaiah saw Jesus' glory and spoke about who? Him. Isn't that an interesting comment? So, why could they not believe? Well, Isaiah 6 and 10 is frequently referenced in the New Testament to explain the unbelief of the Jewish people. Willful rejection had been followed by rejection which was no longer within the power of the will, just like Isaiah said. John 8 and 47, whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. This is not God's doing. God hardens hearts that have already been hardened. There's a whole series of commentaries and discussions about the hardening. When it's no longer possible to hear and to believe. Isaiah 6 says it's not that God is turning soft hearts into hard ones. Rather, he is confirming the condition they've already chosen. The people have long resisted God. God's judgment is now given them over to that hardness, according to Romans 1, verse 24. So God's hardening is both judicial and responsive. In our text, it said they would not believe, and then it later says they could not believe. So the hardening came after the willful choosing not to believe. And I think we can take that same principle and go all the way back to Pharaoh, where God hardened Pharaoh's heart. God hardens hearts that have already become self-fulfilling, self-willful. Judicial hardening, in judicial hardening, the human's still active. God permits or solidifies the hardness in people who have already embraced that mindset. Pharaoh sometimes hardened his heart, other times God did. God's action is not arbitrary. It is a response to repeated rejection. There's a lesson there for us. You know, this is part of the grieving of the Holy Spirit. It's when we, through stubborn persistence, refuse to believe, refuse to obey, until the point comes that our hearts become hardened. And Scripture says for such a person, you don't even need to pray. It's beyond prayer. Would not, and then could not. God's control over hearts and human responsibility are both true. Would not becomes could not. People freely choose to reject God, but God orchestrates their choices to fulfill his purposes. So Judas, the crucifixion itself, all of that comes about through hardening that is brought about by willful refusal over time. Okay, our time is up, and we're going to leave it at that today. And thank you for being here and listening to my diatribe. And take it for what it's worth. Have a wonderful God bless week.